Keep your comments coming into us. Right now, we're going to talk about the issue of childminding. A listener got in touch with us, raising the issue of informal childminders and new regulations that are coming in, which this person thinks will be a disaster. Have a listen. We got Marion O'Flaherty from our newsroom to voice sections of the letter, the lengthy letter that this listener contacted us about.
My 2 children are minded by a local childminder in her home and have been for many years. She's a wonderful woman who treats them and cares for them like her own in a warm, loving environment, and the children are extremely happy. My husband and I chose this woman to mind our children. We didn't want them minded in a creche. Apart from the fact that it's located 6 miles away from us, we found it to be a clinical, sterile environment. And I know this suits some people, but not us. We visited and looked around her house, met her family, and established what type of person she was. We made an informed decision about the care of our children. And now the arrangement is under threat. Our minder told us she heard on the radio that inspectors will be inspecting her home in the future and that she'll have to undergo a training course to mind our children. And this woman has 20 years' experience. She said if this were to happen, she would just stop minding children altogether, and she could be prosecuted if she did not allow the inspectors into her home. As you can appreciate, this is a huge invasion of her privacy and would have a huge impact on her own family and indeed ours. I thought she must be mistaken, so I took it upon myself to investigate. And indeed, a range of proposals have been launched by an official working group that will have a serious impact on childminders and parents alike. The proposal would mean that all childminders in Ireland would have to register with TUSLA, and their homes would be inspected by TUSLA inspectors. So what would these regulations further require of childminders? I couldn't find the answer to this in the working group report. So I asked a friend of mine who works in a creche what the current regulations mean for creches. And I was absolutely astounded by some of her answers. Apparently they spend all their time filling out forms, even when a child is asleep. She told me that creches are full of excellent minders who spend their time caught up in red tape and have less and less time to look after the children. According to her, there are too many rules, and some of them are absolutely mad. Many of these excellent minders are leaving childcare, meaning young children have new minders frequently, and this is very disturbing for them. She told me that you have to adhere to these requirements or you could be prosecuted. And this is what they are proposing for childminders? I do not blame my minder for saying she will simply stop minding. All this to mind 2 children. I'm not against protecting children, but this appears to be using a sledgehammer to crack a nut. It will inevitably drive away dedicated and caring childminders like ours.
There you go. That comes in from a genuine person describing themselves as a genuinely concerned parent, and their concern, as you heard there in that letter, arising out of proposed new regulations on the area of childminding, particularly maybe informal childminding arrangements. Thousands of childminders face inspections and mandatory training under the proposals contained in the government commissioned report. With me on the line to talk about the issues raised by our listener is Bernadette Orbinski, Burke, who's CEO of Childminding Ireland and chair of the working group appointed by Minister Zappone behind the recently published report on reforming, inspecting and supporting the informal childminding sector. Bernadette, thanks for coming on this morning to address those concerns.
You're
first
welcome,
of all,
Jerry.
what do you make of the points made in the letter by our listener? A sledgehammer to crack a nut.
Yeah. Well, if you wouldn't mind, if I just maybe give a little bit of background for your listeners who are maybe not as familiar with the subject, and then obviously I'm delighted to come on to the very eloquent letter. But just to say that childminders are self-employed childcare providers, and they work in their own home, often for several different families. And it's a relationship-based form of childcare, and children often stay with a single childminder from babyhood through national school right to secondary school. So it's a really positive form of childcare for children. And what your listeners may not be aware of is that there's an estimated 35,000 childminders in Ireland. Only 120 are registered with TUSLA, and they're minding an estimated 88,000 children. So what I would say is those numbers speak for themselves, that the current system isn't working for childminders. And I also wanted to clarify for your listeners that if a childminder isn't registered with TUSLA, it doesn't mean that there's any substandard quality of care. That unless you're minding 4 preschool children, you can't register with TUSLA. There is no system for you. So that, I think, is a really important point, that it's not, that registering makes you somehow a superior childminder, that this isn't possible for the vast majority of childminders currently. So at Childminding Ireland, our members, the majority of whom are not required to register, are self-regulating in this vacuum. They all have Garda vetting. They have insurance for childminders, and also they've signed up to a code of ethics. And recently the Board of Childminding Ireland have increased the membership criteria from July 2019 to include first aid for children and also a foundation course in child protection. There's a lot of really good quality childminding going on at the moment in Ireland. I just want to make that point. And also to turn to the points made in the letter, again, another example of an extremely successful childminding relationship with the family from the sound of it, and I'm not surprised to hear that. It's great that families and childminders families, the relationship, the bonds that develop are really strong. So that's a real positive. And I think the other really important point made in the letter was the parental choice aspect. Not every child is the same. Not every family is the same, and what suits one child and a particular family isn't going to suit them all. So, we need access to all forms of childcare, creches and childminders. I think the concerns that your listener was mentioning about the regulatory burden on creches. I mean, this isn't something that is new. It's in the news fairly regularly. And what is absolutely fundamental is that childminding is not the same as a creche, that any inspections that would be suitable and proportionate and appropriate for a childminder are not the same as for a creche. And I can't actually speak about creches. We are only, our only focus is childminders. So really the critical point is to make sure that if any of these, again, just to stress, these are proposals, no decisions have been taken.
Yes, yeah.
And the key is going to be, what would these look like? What would the actual sort of inspection look like for childminders?
Yeah, because you can understand, Bernadette, the fear that's there when somebody thinks, I'm running a very small operation here, it's been running very successfully, I've never had an incident, and all of a sudden I'll have 2 SLET inspectors at my door. Now, no one's against inspections, particularly when it comes to minding children. They would be important, but they hear the word TUSLA and the fear of children say, right, that's it, I'm done. I'm not able to. I'm not going to be. Am I going to be treated like the big, well-financed creche down the road that has 50 children and a lot of staff? Am I being expected to be at the same standard?
Yeah, no. I mean, that's completely unfeasible. That's not what TUSLA want either. That. In fairness to TUSLA, they can only inspect against the regulations, and the current regulations are not suitable for childminders. So that's a big piece of work that needs to be looked at. The department is going to look at all the proposals from the working group, and they're hoping by December of this year to have a high-level plan in place. And to that end, what Childminding Ireland, we're have a bit of a trip around the country. We're visiting all around the country in the coming months. We want to meet with childminders, with parents, with our members, obviously, and other childminders who are interested in this. We'll be having meetings and taking back information to the department to inform what the future.
So you'll be addressing those concerns and bringing the concerns like the ones in the letter back to the government. Absolutely.
And we would love it if the childminder mentioned in that letter, for example, if she would contact us and we could perhaps speak to her directly on 01287 8466. We have former childminders answering the phone, and they would be delighted to speak to her and hopefully to reassure her a bit that we want the system to work. I think it's in everybody's interest. If you think of the three main groups, there's children, childminders and parents. And unfortunately, as things stand today, anybody can set up as a childminder.
Yeah, well, that's something that certainly shouldn't continue. Anyone to set up and just stick a sign in their door, or not even, and just say, I'm qualified to childmind. Nobody wants that, that's for sure. But the question will be balancing the regulation with the realities of running this sort of a small business. One point, and look, this comes up with every new regulation in every area. But it's put there by listeners, so I'll put it to you. On childminding discussion, the reason they will have to be registered is to do with the revenue. It's all about money and cracking down on undeclared income from childminding. Your response?
Well, absolutely not. It's actually about child protection, child safeguarding. It's about giving childminders access to training and supports and funding. And parents, this state subsidy that's coming in, the Affordable Childcare Scheme, parents can only access that if they are using a registered service. And as I mentioned at the beginning, there are so few registered childminding services. That's going to have a huge impact as the subsidies increase over time. And if I could just mention as well, Jerry, there is a tax relief for childminders of €15,000, which is not inconsiderable.
Yeah, because it's not in the government's interest to strangle this section of the industry with regulation, because it's
absolutely
people out there are paying huge amounts of money. They need as much choice as possible and need to find a solution that suits them, because it's one of the biggest costs that parents face alongside their mortgage.
Absolutely. And childminders do tend to be less expensive than centre-based care, and they tend to be more flexible. In rural Ireland in particular, childminders are absolutely vital for people being able to work. This isn't something that can be done badly. This has to be done well.
Okay.
And the numbers are huge, so it's going to be done. Nothing has been decided, and anything that does happen will happen slowly and incrementally, and there'll be, I'm sure, lots of supports available, and we would hope grandfathering clauses as well. So it's in everybody's interest this is a success.
Noreen in Tralee contacts us this morning with a similar concern to the one echoed in the letter, Bernadette. I childmind for 9 years and love it. Myself and my two childminding friends have spoken about these proposed changes. We will be changing careers. A lot of people can't afford creches, says Noreen. I'd imagine you'd be hoping that they contact you, Bernadette, to voice their concerns.
Exactly, and come along when we have our meeting in Kerry, if you wouldn't mind. We'll come back to you and give you information on when and where it will be. And I don't make any decisions. Nothing has been decided yet.
Yeah, these are just proposals at this stage.
These are proposals, and we can try and influence the action plan. So it's really important to come along to the meetings.
And have your voice heard.
Absolutely.
Okay, overall, Bernadette, and following on from these changes, whatever shape they do take when they do come in, are you sensing from Catherine's opponent or this government that they're finally going to try and grapple the overall issue of the cost of childcare in this country, be it a creche or a childminder? It's been one that several different governments have messed around with and fiddled around with, but really haven't gotten right yet. Yeah.
I mean, it's an absolutely enormous problem for parents. I mean, every family in the country, I'm sure, struggles with how to balance, rearing your children, working, paying the mortgage. I mean, it is, a huge challenge for everyone. I think in fairness to Minister Zapone, she has started the ball rolling with the Affordable Childcare Scheme, and as it's called now, the September measures that are in place at the moment. There is a universal subsidy for parents using registered childcare providers, and there is a means-tested amount as well that over time, as in successive budgets, it would be hoped that would increase. Yes, it is a huge problem, and it will take time because it will take so much money to try and address it. But I think the ball has started rolling. And I think that, again, to go back to childminders as well, I mean, that will impact on childminders. In order to get any sort of government subsidy, for public money, you will need a form of registration.
Yeah, so that's probably non-negotiable. That's going to happen if you want to get the relief.
If you want public money, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right, Bernadette. Listen, we'll leave it there. But thanks very much for coming on to talk about those proposals at the moment and the roadshow you're engaging upon to talk to childminders across the country. If you are, like some of our listeners who contacted us this morning, in childminding, and you're worried about the changes that are coming in the regulation that is on the way, then the number to call is 01287 8466. That's 01287 8466. And Childminding Ireland will be touring the country and having nights and meetings so that you can have your say to try and influence the severity or otherwise of those regulations that do come in. An example of some of them that have been proposed: up-to-date certificate in first aid for children, insurance for the childminding service, certification in Always Children First training, Garda vetting, 2 written references, a copy of a health and safety risk assessment, and a copy of a fire safety plan. Some of those would be seen as fairly reasonable, others may be onerous. And if you have a view on it,